So the biggest what ifs in UGA history, and kind of what may have happened if Georgia doesn't if some of these things happen differently in the over the course of Georgia history. So the first one I got on my list, maybe not the biggest one, but the first one I'm going to start with. Shout out to my brother because this was his idea. I'll give him that. And this was the example he gave me. So I'm going to start off with the very first one, and that's, what if Roquan Smith signs with UCLA? We were just talking recruiting and everything. And so for those of you who remember, the chaos that used to be signing day, it's not really the same as it once was, but it used to be, the biggest thing ever. And that would have been the 2015 signing day. Roquan Smith announcing on ESPN pulls out the UCLA glasses, or I said glasses, the UCLA gloves and everything, flashes them up, and in Montezuma, Georgia, Macon County, he commits to the UCLA Bruins, and just devastating. We got this number one linebacker, or whatever he was. He was like a top 20 player in the country, coming out of Montezuma, Georgia, and this guy is committing to UCLA. And then the word gets out, Roquan still hasn't signed. Like, wait. And then I believe it was Jeff Ulbrich, if I'm not mistaken, was the linebacker coach at UCLA. Turned out he was taking the Falcons, their linebacker or DC job. I think the Falcons DC job at the time for Dan Quinn. And Roquan Smith doesn't sign. He's like, wait, that's my guy. That's my linebacker DC at UCLA. If he's leaving, I don't want to go to UCLA. And so then Roquan doesn't even sign a letter of intent. He just enrolls at Georgia, doesn't sign with anybody. Goes to Georgia, and then we know what Roquan Smith was. I mean, this guy was, the heart and soul of Georgia's defense in 2017. And I feel like the 2017 season, like, I feel like it'll be forever like the 91 Braves, like the worst to first. Like, of the Kirby era, like the 2017 season is the year that started it all. And it's just that physicality on defense is what just set the tone for the Kirby Smart era. And it's like, is Georgia's defense enough to win the SEC in 2017 without Roquan Smith? Like an inside linebacker who I think finished, like 7th in the Heisman voting. Should have been a finalist, by the way. Defensive players don't get nearly enough love, but Butkus Award winner. Like, are they winning the SEC and without Roquan Smith? Like, with all due respect to who would have been Reggie Carter, and I don't know. I think Tay Crowder was a starter the next year. Like, Tay Crowder talks about Roquan Smith's impact on him, how he made him the kind of player that he is. So I feel like Roquan Smith just set the tone for what Georgia became. Like, I mean, Georgia produced good linebackers prior to Roquan Smith at Georgia, but I mean, the linebacker you talk, I don't think is the same without Roquan Smith. Like, he's the best inside linebacker in the NFL today. Like, right now, like, that's the guy is just different. And I think if Georgia doesn't get Roquan Smith, do they become a school that Nakobe Dean wants to come to? Like, does Nakobe Dean watch Georgia's defense? Like, yeah, I want to play in that system. Do they get Nakobe Dean? Do they get Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, like these guys? And are they the kind of school that Justin Williams, Chris Cole, like each year, Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, and Troy Bowles that one year? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, Georgia's signing like 2 elite linebackers, it seems like, every year. And I think a lot of kind of that foundation was laid when Roquan Smith played at Georgia in that 2017 season. And I just saw a podcast clip sent to my brother. Someone asked him the hardest he ever hit anyone, and I just paused it. I was like, I know exactly what he's about to say. And it was the 2017 Mississippi State game where he just absolutely destroyed Nick Fitzgerald. Georgia, that was when Georgia kind of announced. The Notre Dame game was the one they kind of, like, the national win they got, but the Mississippi State game, because Mississippi State was hot at that point. They were like ranked top 10, top 15, had just blasted LSU, I think. That was the game where I was like, okay, Georgia looks like the real deal. in 2017. But yeah, Roquan Smith, he was legit. My next what if, I'm gonna take it to it's keeping that 2017 season. What if Jacob Eason doesn't get hurt in the App State season opener in 2017? Like, does Georgia do the same thing with Jacob Eason that they did with Jake Fromm? I mean, that team, lost one game, wins the SEC. You think about the actual regular season. Obviously, the Auburn loss, like they got destroyed on the road that year. But blasted Tennessee, blasted Florida, like I was just talking about, blasted Mississippi State. You had that big time road matchup with Notre Dame. Like Jake Fromm had to make some plays to win that game, but what was the score? 20-17, I want to say. It's not like the offense did a lot. Maybe with Jacob Eason, maybe Georgia hits another deep shot in that game. Jacob Eason had a great arm, had a better arm than Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm was a better college quarterback than Jacob Eason. I'm not here to say that. I'm never going to argue that. There are some people that look, oh, Eason was drafted before Fromm. Like, what was Georgia thinking? Just another bad quarterback decision that Kirby Smart made, right? Doesn't know how to evaluate quarterbacks. Like Jacob Fromm is a better college quarterback than Jacob Eason. But I do wonder, there weren't a lot of games that Georgia won in 2017 because of Jake Fromm. Like, with all due respect, I think the Oklahoma game, he definitely made some plays down the stretch for Georgia to win that. It's hard to ignore Sony Michel having 4 touchdowns and like 200 something yards of offense. Sony Michel did a lot to win that game as well. Just one of the best Georgia games of all time, without a doubt. Jake Fromm had a great freshman year, but it was for a freshman quarterback. Like, it wasn't like it was just he was one of the best players in college football or anything. He was just, wow, this freshman is got Georgia competitive. So I'm not trying to take any credit away from Jake Fromm. I just wonder, do they accomplish the same thing with Jacob Eason? And then if we're thinking, and no one ever gives Jake Fromm enough credit for how good he was in 2018, by the way. He was absolutely lights out in 2018. One of the reasons this next hypothetical is a hypothetical. But Jake Fromm was great in 2018. The 2019 season, not so much. But Jacob Eason, going back to Jacob Eason, he still was a guy who went pro early. So he's at Georgia 2016, 2017, transfers to Washington and uses his redshirt year, and then plays 1 year at Washington in 2019 and goes pro. So he was a guy who played 3 seasons and went pro. If that's the case, say nothing changes in 2017, Georgia, with Jacob Eason, they lose in the national champ, win the SEC, losing the national championship. 2018, maybe it's even more the same. Maybe it's the same exact thing that happens with Jacob Eason, the same year that Eason has, that Fromm has in 2018. Just for hypothetical purposes, if Jacob Eason goes out and throws 30 touchdowns, 5 picks, puts on a show versus Alabama in the SEC championship, even if Georgia misses the playoff, I think that guy's still going pro. And Jacob Eason, who knows? If Jacob Eason did what Jake Fromm did in 2018 with his measurables, he may have been a first round pick. So regardless, I think Jacob Eason goes pro after the 2018 season. And that leads us to another what if, because if Jacob Eason's final year at Georgia is 2018 and he goes pro, I think what happens if Justin Fields never transfers? And I know Georgia fans, we don't like talking about Justin Fields, all right? It was a sore topic for a long time, but we've won 2 natties and everything's cool now. So we can think about these things hypothetically. Does Georgia win a national title with Justin Fields if he never transfers? I think it's a really interesting question. I personally always am of the thought of if he comes back in 2019, Fromm didn't struggle per se like that much, but it was the offense struggle. Like the offense just was, it was just like, because you look at his stats, I think he was like 25 touchdowns, 5 picks that year, but the offense was just so blah. And it was, they threw the ball a lot. It's the only year where Georgia really just had one guy, even though Swift was really good in his 1 year. it was just the run game wasn't great. So with the offense just being kind of stagnant in 2019, I think at some point Justin Fields gets a legitimate like shot that's like, okay, let's see what the offense looks like with this guy. And I mean, this guy was a Heisman finalist in 2019. So I think at some point, if he's really just been given the offense and like let it ride, and if you remember, Georgia lost like their top 4 or 5 receivers that year. Maybe those would be some backups that Fields had a better, rapport with. There were also just not a lot of good receivers on that team. True freshman Pickens was definitely the best one. Lawrence Cager, you had like Tyler Simmons. Like the thing is, so I think eventually Fields would have beaten out Fromm if he just is there 2019. Fromm is just not the kind of quarterback that loses the spot. He's just real solid. I think there's another hypothetical where you say, what if Fromm comes back in 2020? Kind of how that changes Georgia. But that's not one of the ones I went with. So we'll keep it on topic here. The thing is about this theory with Justin Fields, and I see Jackson Johnson in the comments. Yes, I believe UJ would win a natty with Justin Fields. On the surface, I think it's fair. And then you actually kind of dig in. And I think most people are like, oh, they wouldn't have won a championship those years anyway. And then you dig in a little further and you're like, not so fast, my friend. So you look at 2019, say Justin Fields is the quarterback. 2019 LSU is maybe the greatest team of all time. It's talked about by some as the greatest team of all time. It's hard to say when it doesn't have a great defense. I see a team with a great offense and a great defense is probably better, but the team, we've never seen any kind of offensive firepower like we did with a team with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. It's just stupid. I've never seen anything like it. Most haven't. You go back to 2019 Georgia LSU. Let me pull this up. 37-10 was the score of Georgia LSU 2019 SEC championship when they faced that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson offense. But if you remember, like some Georgia fans do, Tyler Simmons dropping a wide open deep ball on the first play of this game. Georgia had Jake Fromm had it dialed up first play of the game, and then Georgia dropped it. That's not to say the game is different if Georgia they lost 37-10. But my main point is if you look how Georgia lost 37-10, it's that game is 17-3 at halftime. 17-3, and I remember that's the game that George Pickens is suspended for the first half because of the fight in the Georgia Tech game. Also, DeAndre Swift had just hurt a shoulder before that game, I think in the Georgia Tech game. And like DeAndre Swift was basically a shell of himself in that game. Let me see. Do I have the stats right here? What were Swift? Yeah, DeAndre Swift had 2 carries for 13 yards. And so like DeAndre and 3 catches for 18 yards. It's like they were trying to get the ball to Swift out in space and just hope he like wouldn't hurt himself. But I mean, you had Brian Herring. Like this LSU defense wasn't even good that year. Held Brian Herring to 8 for 24, James Cook 5 for 23, Swift 2 for 13. You just can't really convince me that Justin Fields doesn't make a difference in that game. Like it might not be a 27-point difference, but it's like 17-3 at the half. Maybe it's 17-10 at the half, maybe it's 17-14. Maybe like I don't think we can underestimate how much better Justin Fields was in 2019 than Jake Fromm. But at the end of the day, it is 2019 LSU, and I'm not sure Georgia beats them anyway. But then you talk about 2020, and 2020 Alabama, also one of the greatest teams of all time. And Georgia went into Tuscaloosa that year with Stetson, lost 41-24. But I think 2020 is kind of one of the biggest what ifs. And like I said, I think with Jake Fromm alone coming back I wasn't even really thinking about that hypothetical when I started this exercise, but I think Jake Fromm coming back in 2020 alone, the quarterback play that Georgia got in 2020 was just so awful. Like no Kirby Smart team has ever had quarterback play that bad. You probably have to go back to freshman Stafford with Joe Tereshinski. I think Stafford threw like 13 picks, like 7 touchdowns or something that year. You probably got to go all the way back to 06, which I don't want to tease things. I am going to go back to 2006, by the way. We're going to keep these hypotheticals going. But right now we're talking about 2020, and 2020 is one of the ultimate like lost years, I think, in Georgia football because of that quarterback position. It was just the quarterback play was so bad. I think if you had average quarterback play, which is probably what people would call 2019 from just average quarterback play, I think he's a little better than that. But I understand why people say that. It's just good, not great. And I think if Fromm is exactly as good as he was in 2019, I mean, that is just leaps and bounds better than what Stetson and Dwan Mathis were in 2020. It came around when JT Daniels ended the season, but if they're playing meaningful games with a good quarterback, I think it's really it's who knows what that team could have accomplished. Like we talk about how loaded that 2021 Georgia defense was. It's like all those guys were on the 2020 Georgia defense, along with Richard LeCount and Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell and Azeez Ojulari. Like there were some guys on that team, and a healthy George Pickens a full season. So, you put Justin Fields on that team. This team was in, like I said, they were in Tuscaloosa, lost 41-24. This team was up on one of the best teams of all time, 2020 Alabama, with bad Stetson Bennett. I know Stetson became great, but with bad Stetson Bennett in 2020, this team was up 24-20 on Alabama with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. Then Stetson throws the pick near the end zone. Was it a pick near the end zone, or is it just a punt? I think it was just a punt. Up 24-20 late in the third quarter. I think then Jalen Waddle had the 90-yard touchdown. And then Georgia's still driving with like 3 minutes left in the third. And Stetson, it gets deflected. Stetson throws the pick. It's picked off in the end zone. I think returned like out to midfield or something. But Georgia's trailing 27-24 in the red zone. Throw a pick in the end zone, like down 3 in the final minutes of the third quarter with bad Stetson Bennett. You talk about Justin Fields in that situation. And I know Justin Fields faced that Alabama team in the 2020 national championship, and they got absolutely boat raced. It would have been crazy if you said this now, but today, no one would even argue with you. The 2020 roster supporting cast at Georgia was better than Ohio State. I think that would have been a crazy thought if you said Georgia's roster is better than Ohio State in 2020. A lot of people wouldn't believe you. Oh, Kirby Smart, he's just Muschamp 2.0. He can recruit, but he can't develop. All those garbage things people were saying back in 2020. That Georgia supporting cast in 2020 was better than Ohio State. And if you put Justin Fields on Georgia's team, I don't think there's any way that team doesn't win the national championship in 2020. And I think, I'm talking about Alabama right now. That's the team that won the national championship. They also lost to Florida by 2. And that's a game that Stetson got knocked out of, that Georgia actually jumped up 14-0 with Stetson. And then Dwan Mathis had to play that whole game. And so Dwan Mathis was significantly worse than bad Stetson Bennett. And that team, that Florida team beat Georgia by 2 touchdowns. So you put Justin Fields on that team, Georgia probably wins by 2 or 3 touchdowns, honestly. Like it would be night and day different. If Justin Fields is the quarterback and Zamir White's breaking 80-yard runs and all of that stuff. There's also the Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint injury after they went up 14-0 that kind of shell-shocked the team a little bit. That was like a really weird just vibe, just like a horrific injury. It felt like that threw off Georgia's mojo. But regardless, you put Justin Fields on that 2020 team, and they're not losing 2 regular season games. So I think at worst, Georgia's going to Atlanta, and maybe they lose to Alabama twice. Maybe it's different in the SEC championship. And then who knows? I mean, they probably would have to play a third time, probably. Who made the playoff? 2020. That was when Ohio State and Clemson, when Ohio State beat Clemson and Alabama beat Notre Dame, I want to say. So, yeah, when the ACC got two teams in, it would have been a really weird year. If Notre Dame and Alabama both still got in after losing the conference championship game. The 1 year Notre Dame's in the ACC, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember exactly how everything shook out. But I think Georgia beats Florida in 2020. And then Kirby's sitting on like 8 straight over Florida if they didn't lose in 2020. But ultimately, where this hypothetical takes you is that Stetson Bennett doesn't end up at Georgia. If Justin Fields stays at Georgia. I think after Fields went in the portal, that was why Stetson got that late offer in the 2019 class. And everyone loves to talk about Stetson being a walk-on. He was a former walk-on. Yeah, but he was on scholarship for like 4 years at Georgia. Like, let's not forget that. But yeah, so Stetson Bennett doesn't end up at Georgia if Justin Fields stays. And maybe that means they win a championship sooner. Maybe that means we're sitting in 2025 and Georgia still has that. Now it's a 45-year drought of winning a national championship. I think the 1980 thing would be stinging pretty hard right now. So Stetson, the two-time national champion, Heisman finalist. That is something that Justin Fields never accomplished in his college career. So my next hypothetical, speaking of national championships, I don't even know how to phrase this hypothetical, so I'll just be as simple as possible. What if Georgia wins the 2012 SEC championship game? And so the hypothetical, I was going to say, what if we spike it? What if Chris Connolly doesn't catch that pass there? I actually saw a clip of this the other day, and I think there's like 15 seconds with the ball on like the 8, maybe 12 by the time they would have been able to spike it. I'll never understand why they didn't spike that ball, man. It's 12 seconds on the 8-yard line. You spike it. You have 3 shots to the end zone with the SEC championship on the line. And I feel like the worst part is that was the best part of Aaron Murray's game. Like, he did not have the elite arm strength. I feel like he had the perfect accuracy and the little 7-on-7 type deal, just a little short yardage passing game. I feel like that was kind of perfect for Stetson's skill set. And you had, one of the deeper receiving cores that Georgia ever had too in 2012. So, man, who was it? Malcolm Mitchell. You had Tavares King, Chris Connolly, Michael Bennett, Arthur Lynch at tight end, who almost won the damn thing himself on that final drive. But yeah, if that ends differently and Georgia ends up getting in the end zone, winning the SEC championship, I think everyone knows, other than some stubborn Notre Dame fans. Maybe Georgia doesn't blow out Notre Dame, but I think everyone knows after watching Georgia go toe-to-toe with Alabama, they would absolutely have beaten that Notre Dame team, probably destroyed that Notre Dame team, but that's a different story. That's an opinion. Ultimately, Georgia beats that Notre Dame team, wins a national championship in 2012. And what happens if Georgia wins the national championship in 2012? How long does Mark Richt stay at Georgia? I think, he doesn't get fired in 2015. That's for sure. If he just won the national championship, like 10-3 is fine in between championship years. It's the 2015 season didn't get Mark Richt fired. It's just the we're good every year. We're never the best. And I think eventually that just also 2013 and 2014 weren't great. But it's like, what happens in 2013? if you remember that 2013, that's one of the more loaded Georgia recruiting classes I can ever remember. You had Robert Kimdichie coming out, which obviously Ole Miss was doing shady things on the recruiting trail with Laramie Tunsil and Robert Kimdichie. So maybe don't land either one of them. But there was Montravius Adams, Reuben Foster, Alvin Kamara was in that class. It was one of the most loaded classes the state of Georgia I think has ever seen. Georgia ended up with Shaq Wiggins and Trey Matthews, who didn't end up in Athens when their career was all said and done. But you just look at that year, like 2013, for it being as loaded as it was in the state of Georgia. Georgia whiffed on almost everybody, and I honestly think the 2013 class is what got Mark Richt fired. You look at that 2013 class, and I don't even have it sitting up in front of me, and I'm not trying to call out any individual dudes, but it was like 30 players in that 2013 class, and I think I named the two highest ranked ones, Trey Matthews and Shaq Wiggins. Obviously, we know how those guys worked out, and it was a lot of misses in that 2013 class. I know Bryce Ramsey was in that class, but there was a lot of misses in that 2013 class, just so few impact players. And I think ultimately that's the one that kind of ended it for Mark Richt. And you know what that team, what we were in 2015 and kind of 2016 for Isaiah McKenzie to be the only guy that was drafted off that team in Kirby's first year. I think, I just wonder how things change if Mark Richt wins that title in 2012. Do they land a couple of those dudes in 2013? Does Georgia recruiting just change completely? Richt retired from Miami in 2018. Is he still Georgia's coach all the way through 2018? Or, were some of those health problems kind of sneaking up on him sooner? And, obviously we know Mark Richt had a public, publicly, his battling those health issues he's had. Maybe because of that championship in 2012, he's kind of ready to hang it up himself in 2013, 2014. And he's just, he's not still chasing that championship. Maybe he hangs up in 2015. Georgia hires Kirby and it's completely different. But also, maybe things are different in terms of if Georgia wins a championship, there's more of a concept of having an offensive-minded coach. Maybe you don't want Kirby Smart as your head coach. Maybe if he's the head coach in 2016, 2017, people talk about like Kirby was ready to take that South Carolina job in 2015 or in December of 2015. Right? Yeah, December of 2015 when Kirby got hired. So I think it's like is Kirby Smart Georgia's coach if Mark Richt wins a national title? If he goes to South Carolina and maybe he goes to Auburn, maybe he goes to South Carolina and he's not good. Maybe he goes to South Carolina and he is Muschamp 2.0, right? Because he can't get good enough players at South Carolina, and maybe he's not the all-time great coach that we all know now. Like, who knows how things could happen? I kind of think Kirby. What's interesting about this hypothetical is I personally think this is kind of the cool thing about Kirby Smart is that I don't think it really matters. I don't think there's any scenario where Kirby Smart isn't eventually the head coach at Georgia. People talk about like if he took the Auburn job, I think it was like 2013. That would have been it. That's when that was Malzahn's first year. But he didn't take that job because I think he stayed on for the national championship. I didn't even think about that. There's another angle right there. So if Georgia wins in 2012, beats Alabama in the SEC championship, Alabama's not playing for the national championship. Maybe Kirby Smart doesn't have to stay on, goes ahead and takes that Auburn job. I didn't even think about it. I'm discovering hypotheticals within my hypotheticals. So, but the ultimate point I was getting back to, maybe that's what happens. And Kirby's hired by Auburn in 2013. I don't think they have the same type of season, but who knows? Maybe the kick six, everything happens the same, and Auburn goes to the national championship year one for Kirby. I don't know, but if Kirby has a few great years at Auburn, I don't think there's any scenario where Georgia doesn't eventually poach him, because you just know at the end of the day, Kirby Smart wants to be in Athens, and maybe he won a national championship at Auburn, but as soon as that vacancy opens at Georgia, I mean, he's there. So I don't know. I guess there's a scenario where after Mark Richt, Georgia hires a good coach, a not great coach, but like a Brian Kelly. Not saying Georgia would hire Brian Kelly, but maybe they hire a Brian Kelly who's just, oh yeah, winning 10, 11 games, and he's not fireable for 7, 8 years, and it takes Kirby a little longer. But I think at some point Kirby always comes home to coach the Bulldogs. But it's an interesting thought. I think Mark Richt is an all-time great coach, and it would have been nice to see him get the championship. I feel like he deserved, and kind of the coaches of that era, I feel like he's one of them, and he kind of belongs in that club. And it's unfortunate that he's kind of thought of the way he is. But going back to 2006, I teased this one earlier, second guessing Mark Richt here. What if Mark Richt does not redshirt Knowshon Moreno in 2006? So let me take the folks back to 2006. Georgia had this three-headed monster of Danny Ware, Craig Lumpkin, and Thomas Brown. And if you are a Georgia fan under maybe 30 years old, you probably don't know who those guys are, because they're not that memorable of players. I am a little bit older than that, and so I remember the days of Thomas. For the record, Thomas Brown, one of my early all-time favorite Georgia players. I was just always a huge fan of Thomas Brown. But so all of them are there 2004. Lumpkin's first year is 2003. Lumpkin was hurt 2004. So you had Thomas Brown and Danny Ware kind of carrying the load. In 2005, they were good. I want to say one of them got hurt. Maybe Lumpkin was hurt again in 2005. I can't remember. The 2005 season wasn't running game wasn't great by any means, but 2006, Thomas Brown definitely tore his ACL after like 5-6 games. Danny Ware led Georgia with rushing, I want to say with like 700 yards or something like that. Just very unimpressive. Danny Ware had a couple hundred yards. Maybe he missed some time. But I think you had this three-headed monster, at least you thought you did. And Georgia averaged 127 rushing yards per game that year. And even that was better than what Georgia was in 2024. Georgia averaged 124 yards a game this past year, which is just insanely bad. So that tells you everything you need to know. One of the worst Georgia run games of recent history was 2006, if you want to call 2006 recent. Knowshon Moreno famously was redshirted in 2006 and was an All-American in 2007. Why am I blanking on the running back? Doak Walker Award finalist in 2008, first team All-American. I think Javon Ringer, I want to say, won it over him. I feel like Knowshon was cheated. He should have won the Doak Walker. It's best running back in the country that year. And he was the first running back drafted, so that's how you know. But Knowshon was just a baller in 2007. And I just wonder if Knowshon is part of 2006, he's just so much better. Like the juice that Knowshon brought when he came into the game. I remember the Oklahoma State game, the season opener in 2007, when he hit that first spin move, and you were just like, who the hell is this guy? He looks like the best player on the team. Knowshon just brought a different energy when he was carrying the ball. And 2007, the dynamic of your redshirt freshman Knowshon and senior Thomas Brown, they were just incredible. And so if you remember 2007, how it was, that Georgia team almost won the national championship with 2 losses. If they were 2 more strategic losses, they could have still gotten the SEC championship. But Tennessee had that tiebreaker over them, and they just never got the chance to play LSU in the SEC championship. I think if they play LSU in the SEC championship, that team wins and wins the national title. But if you just think about the trajectory of 2007, that team started 3-2, or they started 4-2. My stats, then they finished 7-0 down the stretch. My stats here: without Noshawn starting, or with Noshawn not starting, however you want to say that, Georgia was versus Power 5 competition. Georgia was 3-2, averaging 22 points per game. In the 6 games versus Power 5 competition with Noshawn starting, and I'm including Hawaii in Power 5 competition because they were in the damn Sugar Bowl. With Noshawn starting, they were 6-0, averaging 34 points per game. So it was so obvious what Noshawn did to that team. So if his breakout occurs in 2006, and you just kind of see what this guy's got, and from the game 1 in 2007, if Noshawn is the guy, I kind of wonder if Georgia loses those early games to South Carolina or Tennessee, if Noshawn is an established part of the offense. Like, they scored, I think, 12 points in Sanford Stadium to South Carolina. Just one of the worst performances. Fortunately, I didn't see that one live. I saw Allman Brothers opening for Dave Matthews Band at Piedmont Park. Woo. So that's where I was in September 2007. Almost didn't go because of that game, but I'm glad I did, because it's much better than sitting at home watching one of the worst Georgia games I can remember. I did watch it on replay, though. Knowing we lost, I watched it on replay, which, that just says a lot about me and how much of a diehard I am, or how I don't know, I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know. But I wonder if Noshawn is ready. He's the guy. First game 1, or first game 2007. I wonder how that 2007 season is different. Maybe they only lose one game, and they're able to play for the SEC title, and maybe they win a national championship. So they only got 3 years of Noshawn on campus anyway. It's a real what if to think, you could have gotten 3 years of production out of this guy. You only got 2 years of production because of that red shirt in 2006, in a year where you had one of your worst running games. Probably, I didn't go through the Mark Richt years, but probably the worst run game of the Mark Richt era. And you had the best running back in college football the following 2 seasons just over there sitting on the bench. And I think it's a big time second guess for me when it comes to Mark Richt. And then the last one I'll leave you folks with. This one is a real throwback for the folks. And I will say I wasn't as in tune to everything at the time, but I've kind of looked back at it retroactively. And we're going to take you back to 2000. Jim Donnan's final year as the head coach at Georgia. Quincy Carter gets hurt late in the season. I think it was the Florida game. And Jim Donnan had an option to either burn David Green's red shirt or start Corey Phillips, who was just kind of a whatever quarterback who played a couple games for Georgia. So what if Jim Donnan burns David Green's red shirt in 2000? And I think this just had such lasting effects for me, because I grew up on the Richt era, basically. I kind of tell people I'm a Georgia fan since 01. I've obviously been a Georgia fan since birth, but I really start remembering everything in 01. So in 2000, Quincy Carter gets hurt. Like I said, instead of burning David Green's red shirt, Jim Donnan decides to start Corey Phillips for a couple of games, like 4 games to end the season. And if you had David Green starting in 2000, starting his clock in 2000, that means David Green is the starter in 01, 02, and 03. And 2002, Georgia wins the SEC championship and everything. 01, the hobnail boot and all that. But 03 was actually Green's worst year at Georgia. But 04 is the year where Georgia was preseason number 1. By a lot of people. It was preseason number 1, like Sports Illustrated. You had David Pollock as a senior, Thomas Davis and everything, like a loaded supporting cast. But ultimately, you look at what happened in 2005 with DJ Shockley as the starting quarterback. In his 1 year as a starter, DJ Shockley took Georgia to an SEC championship. And in general, 2005 Georgia was just so much more exciting than 2004 Georgia. And I think the defenses were about the same, good defenses, but the difference was that offense. And you saw DJ Shockley, co-SEC Offensive Player of the Year that year. I think if you give DJ Shockley 2 years as the starting quarterback at Georgia, I think maybe it's 04, maybe it's 05. I think Georgia wins a national championship one of those years. And, maybe that's like talking the Justin Fields thing. You had LSU and Bama 2019, 2020. You did have USC in 04 and Texas in 05. USC going for their third national championship in a row in 05, even though they only won one national championship. Seeing, and maybe I'm saving myself from pain now that I think about it, because 04 Auburn, one of the best college football teams I've ever seen. So maybe it's different with DJ Shockley and Georgia's able to beat Auburn. I don't know. That Auburn team smashed Georgia and Jordan Hare that day. Maybe they get a rematch in the SEC championship, but ultimately Auburn 2004 went 13-0 and got left out of the national championship game. And if I was an Auburn fan, I would still be salty about it. One of the best SEC teams of all time that didn't win it. So maybe that saves us from 2004. But DJ Shockley be a second-year starter in 2005. Then it's USC and Texas that both went undefeated. Maybe they don't win a championship that year either. But I think things could have been different if DJ Shockley gets 2 years to start as a Georgia quarterback. And I think he might be remembered kind of differently, his legacy at Georgia, if he gets 2 years to start. So those are some of my my biggest what ifs of my Georgia football fandom. I'll have to ask Bo some of his next week. I felt like, going solo, I just needed to vent about some of these things. And like I said before, this would have been a very sad exercise for a Georgia fan to do back in 2020. Like, oh, why are you doing this to yourself? It's you got to move past these things. You can't think about the what ifs. What if Terrence Edwards never drops that ball against Florida in 2002? I don't know. But you can't think about those things. And started to call out Terrence Edwards like that. Great all-time receiver for Georgia. But you get it. These hypotheticals, they used to drive us crazy as fans. The 1980 stuff. As someone who likes to argue with fans on Twitter, 1980 was always an easy troll they could throw at you, and it always grinded my gears. So the fact that Georgia fans don't have to worry about that anymore, and we can just kind of think of, how many more national championships could we potentially have if some things went differently? But we're not starving for them anymore. Georgia's near the top of the mountaintop. So hopefully we can stay there. Hopefully they can get back to the top in 2025. But that remains to be